Okay.
Okay. Hi everyone, and welcome to ACR North's meeting, Grounds for Revolution, Climate Emergency and Disaster Capitalism. My name's Ali Treacher. I'm a supporter of socialist resistance and a member of the Labour Party. ACR is a revolutionary Marxist organisation in the process of being formed, bringing together comrades from mutiny in socialist resistance and comrades who are looking for a democratically organised alternative. We are eco-socialists organising within and outside the Labour Party. So tonight's meeting, we're really pleased to welcome activists who are organising very different organisations, but with a common goal: to avert the impending climate catastrophe. Although we share a common goal, we hope to explore the different tactics and strategies, but also how we come together and organise for the COP26 summit, where the world's eyes will be on Glasgow. We've been inspired by comrades in Scotland hosting huge organising meetings from the ground up, and as we prepare for other radical initiatives around the conference, we thought to bring activists together to discuss their work, their understanding of the crisis, and what our response must be. So tonight we'll be hearing firstly from Poppy. Poppy Turner sits on the steering committee of Labour for a Green New Deal, but she mainly concentrates her energies on the local organising strategy team. She helped set up Labour for a Green New Deal in Manchester, and is currently a member of the Sheffield group. So if we hand over to you, Poppy, for about 5 minutes, if that's okay.
Great, thanks, Ali. Yeah, so I guess I just firstly wanted to say I don't think there's one correct approach to tackling the climate crisis. And obviously coming at it from multiple angles is always going to be better than just coming at it from one, because it'll be more effective that way. And I'm sure I think we'll hear from the other speakers today as well that capitalism, particularly when it comes to greenwashing from companies like BP or Shell, isn't one of those ways, because ultimately capitalism is the cause of a lot of the problems we're facing today. And a capitalist solution to the climate crisis would be one where the super rich can afford to avoid the effects of it and leave the rest of us in the dust, possibly quite literally. So we can't rely on the market to save the planet, because it's all part of that same extractive economy. And to make any effective change, we need a restructuring of the economy entirely. So before I carry on, I just want to check how familiar people are with the concept of a Green New Deal, or do I need to explain it? Are people fairly familiar? Can I get a nod or a wave? You're all fairly cool. Okay. But some of those different angles to approach the crisis do involve working, as Ali mentioned, inside and outside of formal political structures. So this is kind of one way that's approaching it from within those structures. Because in order to be able to enact a Green New Deal fully, we need state power. And for example, it requires large scale investment in renewables. And the Labour Party is the best chance we've got at that. And getting a Labour government who are going to bring about a Green New Deal into power is still part of what we're aiming for, even if it feels pretty far away at the moment. And also it's worth saying that the Labour Party is only one part of the Labour in Labour for a Green New Deal. There's the Labour movement as well, is a huge part of that. And trade unions, workers, etc. are essential to ensuring a just transition. But also Labour are in power already locally in a lot of places, and there's a lot that can be done in councils and local authorities, devolved governments, etc. And hopefully the elections coming up in May will be an opportunity to get more Green New Deal supporting candidates elected locally. And there's loads of great examples of where this is happening already. So the Mayor of Tyneside, Jamie Driscoll, his administration is doing really great work on community wealth building and circular local economies. And then just this week, it was announced that Andy Burnham might be bringing buses into public control after a lengthy campaign by Better Buses and Greater Manchester residents. So fingers crossed for that one. And so local councils can do a lot, but to do it, we have to go beyond a lot of the traditional thinking in climate activism circles. So, for example, across the UK, councils are investing more than 16 billion into the fossil fuel industry through their pension funds. And there are a lot of really strong divest campaigns. But the next step beyond that and just getting them to divest is to think about where to reinvest that money. And that's where community wealth building comes in, to harness the wealth that kind of already exists locally. So in that pension fund, for example, in a way that's going to be beneficial to both the climate and the residents of that place. So if the money currently invested in fossil fuels was invested instead in building good quality green social housing, for example, it would make a massive difference and would create good green jobs for local people in the process. So I think that's what a lot of the current focus of Labour for a Green New Deal has been recently. And then in terms of COP26, I think at the moment, Labour for a Green New Deal as a national organisation don't have any specific plans, especially with the local and devolved elections coming up in May, but I think we will do. Because quite apart from anything else, even just having 2 weeks where the climate is being focused on in the news will be a huge opportunity to change the conversation. And ensuring that tackling the climate crisis is done in the right way has to be central to whatever we do. It can't just be empty talk, and it has to have environmental justice at its heart. And it should definitely ring alarm bells that Alok Sharma has just become president of COP26, given the fact that when you look at his voting record, he's mostly voted against measures to prevent climate change. And I know that the Glasgow Labour for a Green New Deal local group have been working towards COP26. I think they've got an event coming up next month that's focusing on the Green New Deal and COP26 specifically. And then actually during the conference, the Glasgow group is already planning to kind of link up with other Labour for a Green New Deal local groups and other climate and community activists to work on events and campaigning during the conference when it takes place. Although obviously whether that's in person or not will depend on where COVID restrictions are at by then. And then, yeah, the main thing for us will be to ensure that Labour maintains the commitments they made in the 2019 manifesto. And then, yeah, just to kind of round up, I think it's not just locally and nationally that we need to be looking at a Green New Deal, but it's obviously an international issue. So that's kind of where the focus needs to be for COP26. And Labour for a Green New Deal have a dedicated internationalism team who've been doing a lot of the thinking around this as well. And international facing policy is a big part of the original Green New Deal motion that we got passed at conference in 2019. And so we can't just be passing the buck and exporting our carbon emissions to countries in the global south. So a Green New Deal needs to involve international social justice, welcoming refugees, especially as there'll be more and more people displaced from their homes by the effect of climate change, and things like debt cancellation, sharing of technology and resources. And so that's also why the 2030 decarbonisation date is key, because climate change isn't just something that's looming in the future, but it's a crisis that people are facing right now, and pushing for 2030 is a position based in international solidarity. So hopefully that gives you a bit of the flavour of the thinking around COP26, but also just sort of what we're working on and pushing for now, despite the fact that we don't necessarily have the ideal conditions for a Green New Deal with another 4 years of this horrendous Tory government and the Labour leadership in the state that it's in currently.
Thank you so much, Pops. Yeah, really interesting about what you're saying about mobilising around COP26 and what Labour for a Green New Deal are doing. If you have any links, please share them in the chat, because I'm sure that comrades will be interested in getting involved. Thanks. And so now I just want to hand over to Hamish, if that's okay. Welcome, Hamish. Hamish is a member of ACR, and am I right in saying the trade union liaison officer? Is that correct in the North? Ish. Okay, well, over to you, Hamish, and if you want to introduce yourself, that would be ace. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Thumbs up from somewhere. I got a nod. That's great. Yeah, my name's Hamish. Yes, I'm active with Extinction Rebellion, amongst other groups. I am personally, I suppose, focused on making connections and collaboration possible, and having something that is more working class centred and more about the empowerment of ordinary people as the route to the only route to the changes we need. So hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I haven't got long, so I'll start my stopwatch actually. I'm going to make a few points. I'll try and make them clearly, and I'll try not to speak too quickly. Hopefully I can cover them in the time we've got. Otherwise, I'll just follow up hopefully in the responses to questions, discussion afterwards. So I think the first thing I'd say is that obviously the phrase climate and ecological emergency is used a lot. It's appropriate. The scale and the speed of change needed is far beyond what is in the imagination of most of us, really, I think. I've looked as closely as I can at the inverted commas science on this, because obviously there are differences, different viewpoints, but the changes are huge, and it goes beyond just the idea of decarbonisation. When you look at things like deforestation and so on, then it's a whole new level of change. And I'll give you an example. If we look at developed countries, so-called global north and so on, in my view, quite substantial, serious degrowth is needed. You could imagine something like a 2 or 3 day working week being the norm. The follow-up from that is that you need, obviously, radical wealth redistribution, radical power redistribution more than anything. And I'm not talking about electrical power, although of course that's part of it. But this isn't about building lots of wind turbines and putting up solar panels. If I could just talk about electric cars very briefly, the idea that the climate and ecological emergency is compatible with tens, if not hundreds of millions of electric vehicles being built is absurd. When you actually look at the situation we're in, the situation that millions of people around the world are already in and have been in for a long time, there's a whole new level of thinking needed. And one of the main sticking points that we're facing is that the system within of all, patriarchy, capitalist, imperialist, and so on, white supremacist dominated. It relies absolutely and is built in to a need for growth, and that is a fundamental thing that cannot really be changed in the system, and that alone in itself points to a necessity for really, if not revolutionary change, then radical reform, far beyond what our political systems are capable of delivering. In any case, I think whether you're looking at whether you feel that the only revolutionary social change is needed, or massive changes, sort of reforms, the approach is the same, and that relies, as I mentioned at the start, on the empowerment of ordinary people, systematically, strategically, building power. I'm influenced by people like McAlevey on this. I think that the approach of building towards a much more organised, conscious, working in solidarity across the global community, movement of movements is what's needed at this point. So yeah, I think that requires a whole new approach really from environmentalists and labour movement and so on. I think that the global majority leadership on this is going to be crucial. And I'll finish by just saying a little conversation starter about COP26. In my view, COP26 Glasgow should be a ghost town. I don't think anyone should go there. It's a circus. It has been for 25 iterations already, 25 versions of it already. How many more chances are they going to get? I think that there's a new way of doing this, a new global community way of doing this, and I think we could, for example, be building towards a general strike in 2030. make that an aim now. There's so many ways, so many things to talk about here, so many different approaches, and I hope that we get a chance to start that conversation now. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
Yeah. Thanks, Hamish. Yeah, and this is why we wanted to bring activists together, because, you know, having these discussions and talking about these ideas and new ways of doing things, because, you know, the one thing's we have to win. So yeah, thanks for your contribution. And also, Hamish, when you come back, I don't know if you can look at your sound because you're a little bit quiet. Fortunately, we've got closed captions, but I don't know if you can turn yourself up for next time. Okay, great. Now we're going to go over to Alex Lee. Alex is a eco-socialist and also a member of anti-capitalist resistance. So over to you, Al.
Hey, it wouldn't allow me to unmute myself.
Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, my name's Alex, and thanks to Poppy and Hamish who gave great talks. So I am going to talk a bit about the limitations of a Green New Deal, and in particular how we must achieve zero carbon and then fight to end capitalism. So the Green New Deal, as we've heard, if implemented ambitiously, can potentially prevent runaway climate change within our lifetimes. It can also include justice and other forms of concepts, but it's still a limited concept. It still tries to make capitalism green, equal and ethical. But capitalism cannot be ethical. It has no morals. It is never satisfied, does not understand justice, does not comprehend planetary limits. It's just a cycle of production, consumption and expansion that goes on forever, subjugating people and the environment in the name of profit. Eco-capitalism is one that might reduce CO2 emissions, but it will continue to devastate working class people and the environment in new ways, while providing the rich with the money to build secure compounds and bunkers to protect themselves. In order to transform our energy system, the Green New Deal will require absolutely massive investment in renewable energy, as Hamish said, and the resource implications are huge. It means moving from oil and gas to a massive extraction of metals like cobalt, silver and lithium, which will see an extraction of minerals from the global south to the global north to transition the white economies away from a carbon-intensive system, providing few benefits to those who live in the south. If the Green New Deal is successful, a few people that own green tech companies will get hugely rich. Existing companies desperate to paint themselves as green through nonsense like carbon or biodiversity offsetting. And it will unleash a whole new era of excessive green consumption to ensure maximum profits for green tech companies. The Green New Deal is likely to create a new form of colonial eco-capitalism, taking minerals from the global south and increasing practices that push down wages, workers' rights and environmental protections to ensure a continued cheap flow of resources to power the green economy in the north. Capitalism always wants to find cheap labour, whether that's workers, working class women, black people, other minorities, doesn't care, as long as there is continued supply of cheap labour. A few white men would have been beneficiaries from slavery and those profits and enabled the Industrial Revolution. And a few white men are likely to be the most to benefit from a green revolution too. The global north has financial and military power, dominates global institutions as well as the COP climate meetings, institutions that will keep the countries of the global south in line. Green New Deal will not do anything to change this. It's not to say the Green New Deal isn't good. Every fraction of a degree of warming is countless numbers of lives lost, lands made uninhabitable, species made extinct, islands flooded. So we must do all we can to reduce emissions immediately. But the capitalist system will keep the South in chains. Capitalism has to end because it will continue to subjugate people in the interest of maximising profit, exploiting with those with the least power the most. And then when the rich feel guilty, the people of the global south will have carbon offset schemes forced onto their lands, which will then displace them and their lives and their cultures. So we need a new democratic system that puts all people from around the world on an equal footing. It must be internationalist. It needs to respect local and indigenous knowledge, which should be considered equal to Western sciences. The Green New Deal needs to stop CO2 emissions, but this must be the first step. It needs to inspire people globally to end this brutal system and implement an eco-socialist society that ends the war on the working class and the global south. Last week, I was at a talk about a pluralistic global Green New Deal, which was really inspiring. It was provided perspectives from all around the world, and there is a booklet available online about how to achieve a globally just Green New Deal that looks beyond national borders and what is possible there. This is a fantastic project that puts voices of the Global South into the Green New Deal, and I urge us to support it in the lead up to the next COP and beyond. I'll put those links in the chat. Thank you.
Brill. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, really great sum up of why we're here. So we ask the speakers just for short contributions, because it's really about, you know, us having this conversation about, you know, kind of tactics moving forward, strategies moving forward, and where the left should kind of spend their time, and some of the kind of radical kind of thinking of some things that Hamish was alluding to. So I'm going to throw it open to the floor now. So you can either wave at me. I think we're small enough for you to wave at me, but if you'd like to use your little blue hand more formally, then that would be great as well. Chris Jones, you are on mute.
Yes, you've got to wait for permission, haven't you? And then you do it, otherwise it all goes cockeyed.
That's just a answer. I enjoyed it so much at the COVID meeting on Saturday that I can't go.
Yeah. So, sorry. Don't know what happened there. Yeah, it was actually a question just to sort of to start things going. It was aimed at Poppy, because I went to a meeting organised by the Centre for Local Economic Strategies and Manchester City Council last week on behalf of the Union Branch, and the way they were dealing with the airport, which is an enormous problem for the movement, and particularly I think for the Green New Deal, was to try and disperse the impact by saying it wasn't Manchester people who were flying, and this is a question that we have to look at in a global sense. Now that's absolutely true, but how is the Green New Deal trying to pitch airports as an issue? Because certainly for councils, which you've talked about, you know, this is a hard one, and it does need a relatively short-term answer on, because once the pandemic eases off a bit, rightly or wrongly, there's going to be a lot of people trying to get people out flying again and making the money out of holidays. And I think it's an impending really bad situation.
Thanks, Chris. Does anybody else want to contribute?
I wanted to ask a question. Can I? I wanted to ask, I suppose it's all of the speakers, about the role of mobilisation around COP26, because I think Hamish, he argued that it's a circus, and I think there's some truth in that, that the great and the good are there, showing that they care about the planet. There are some kind of centre-left governments represented, and some representatives of nations that certainly will go under with global warming. They'll be completely under the sea soon. So they have a material interest in arguing for something to be done, but at the same time, they have a material interest in enabling their capitalist economies to thrive. That is, being committed all the time to growth and to all of the problems of capitalism that the speakers mentioned. So that sort of tension is there in the official negotiations at COP. And I think that there's very little we can do in trying to lobby the people who are engaged in those negotiations. So I agree with Hamish, but the COP26 is a focus. And the question is how we can mobilize people to build our own alternative COP26. I suppose From the Ground Up is one example of that, but I wonder whether Hamish and the others have other ideas about how that can be taken forward.
Brill. Thanks, Ian. Lee?
Sorry, was it me next or?
Oh, Elizabeth, yeah, and then Ian. I think we've got it on a funny setting where we can only people can't unmute themselves. But Elizabeth, if we go to you and then to Lee, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I too am from Sheffield, so I wanted to ask Poppy particularly about how much mileage there is in terms of local Green New Deals, in terms of local initiatives by, you know, local authorities and other groups locally, in terms of tackling the problem, because we can't just wait till the next general election and hope for a better government. And we obviously don't expect a lot from this government. And certainly, I'm in Sheffield Hallam constituency Labour Party, and in fact, the Sheffield Hallam MP, Olivia Blake's been doing really quite a lot in terms of webinars and things about the Green New Deal. You know, there are lots of meetings to try to get a green manifesto for Sheffield and so on. So, you know, there are things happening. Now, how much impact, if these things succeed, will they actually have in tackling the problem of the level of carbon emissions and so on? I just wanted to ask that question, really.
Brilliant, thanks, Elizabeth. And then if we take a contribution from Lee and then back to the speakers. Great, I think you're unmuted, Lee.
Hi. Thanks to the speakers. Yeah, I'm interested in tactics, considering what Andreas Malm said in one of the meetings earlier, and he referred to Kim Stanley Robinson's book, The Ministry of the Future, which I've nearly finished, and I'm kind of in agreement with Malm and Kim Stanley Robinson that this is not going to be just like waving banners around. So how far do we go, and what kind of tactics do we use? Because I think, as Malm talks about with Energy Wende, we need to stop the fossil fuels being used, and that is something we can do. But at the same time, we're facing a rabid Tory government who are not going to pull back their COVID fucking restrictions when COVID's over. They're going to try and keep them in place. Thanks.
Thanks, Lee. Yeah, that was a really, really great meeting. And thanks for bringing up the points around tactics. So, Poppy, shall we go to you first? Is that all right?
Yeah, I think, yeah, a load of really interesting points. I think I'll come to, I think on the airports first. I think, yeah, in terms of the Green New Deal, I think what Labour for a Green New Deal have been proposing is that, especially with the coronavirus pandemic, nobody's been flying, airports have been suffering a massive loss. And I can't remember what the actual amount is, but I think because Manchester City Council threw a load of money at the airport at the beginning of the pandemic to prop it up, and I think we did in Manchester we did a campaign against that, and because ideally the council owning the airport is the first step. That's good. Public ownership is part of a Green New Deal, but the next step would then to be wind it down, ensure that all the workers at the airport are redeployed into sort of other transport networks like rail, for example. So it's not just a case of a lot of people suddenly losing their jobs. So that's why public ownership would be useful, so you kind of have control over that. But obviously throwing a load of money at domestic flights is definitely not ideal and not part of a Green New Deal. Although obviously, I guess one part of it is that it's not really about individual responsibility. So individual people taking flights to Spain on holiday when it's cheaper than getting a train to the other end of the country is not really what our focus is. We're not trying to blame those people, because that's not how you're going to get people on board. So yeah, I think it's an interesting one, but definitely scaling back, or stopping domestic flights is really important. And I would say Manchester City Airport is a big part of that, and something that doesn't get talked enough about by Manchester City Council. It's sort of the elephant in the room a lot of the time, and definitely needs to be addressed if Manchester City Council are going to go anywhere towards reducing their carbon emissions. And then, yeah, I think, and also kind of based on what Alex was saying about the Green New Deal, I think it really depends on who's talking about the Green New Deal and what it means to different people. So when Rebecca Long-Bailey launched the Green Industrial Revolution as part of Labour's strategy, like in the run up to the 2019 election, that Green Industrial Revolution means a very different thing than when it's used, but that phrase is used by the Tories, for example. So we've kind of got to be careful about how this language is co-opted. And I think Labour's Labour for a Green New Deal's Green New Deal does kind of like doesn't focus so much on growth, and we do need to kind of be looking towards like a degrowth model. Where that's not going to happen immediately, I think is kind of the point of it, is like the process of how we get to that place where we're going for degrowth. And then we're talking about oh yeah, like an alternative COP26, and I think that's kind of a good point, that yeah, there's not necessarily going to be much achieved in lobbying those sort of who are part of COP26, and that's not necessarily what we should be aiming for. But I do kind of like the idea of like a whole alternative COP26 that's taking part at the same place, because that's what I said earlier, is that's our window, is like that's when it's being talked about, and that's like the opportunity to shift the conversation. I guess kind of in the same way as like the World Transformed have a whole separate thing going on at the same time as Labour Conference, maybe that's something that we could aim for. But I'm interested to hear what other people suggest about that one. And then Sheffield, a local Green New Deal in Sheffield. I think yeah, you're right, we can't wait for the next elections, and I think obviously every bit of sort of carbon emissions that we can reduce is going to be good, and if you're doing it on like chunk of the country at a time, then if that will all add up. And I think if you have somewhere like Tyneside that's doing a really good job and showing how it can be done, or I'm sure you've all heard about the Preston model loads of times, I think when you've got a good example that can be used, then other places will start to do it as well, and then that's kind of where you'll have more of an impact. I think Sheffield City Council are kind of, they've been running some events on community wealth building, and again having meetings with Claire's the Centre for Local Economic Strategies. So I think that like the gears are turning, but probably maybe a bit more slowly than we would like. And I also, in terms of Andreas Malm, it's a shame I missed that event. I've been kind of meaning to read his stuff because everyone's talking about him at the moment. And I think, yeah, in terms of how far we go and tactics, it's like I was saying earlier, you've got to be able to work both inside and outside of those formal structures. Like doing one of them on their own isn't going to be enough. I think it's important to disrupt those structures. But I guess that's me speaking from a personal perspective rather than like on behalf of Labour for a Green New Deal. But yeah, I mean, I think you've got to try everything that you can, and different people have different energy and capacity for different things and be suited to different types of activism. So yeah, all for revolution as well.
Cool, cheers Pops. Hamish, over to you. That's cool.
Oh, Hamish.
Okay, so I'm rather than going for a tech fix and trying to fiddle with my phone, I'm just going to talk louder. Hopefully that'll work. Can you hear me okay? Am I speaking loud? Well, I'll have to get a little closer. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to cover there. I'll try and be quick. Obviously, at the COP process, that are good faith actors. We would want to support them. There's no doubt. And I'll be honest, I think that we're all going to end up there. Even though I'm arguing for us not to go, I think that's what's going to happen. I think that argument may have more traction over the coming years, and I hope that it becomes a reality. I hope it becomes a reality this time. But I think there's so much focus already and plans being made that it's going to be difficult to change people's minds. But what I would say is that yes, we could have an alternative COP meeting. We could help amplify those good faith voices, particularly from those countries and those places where the suffering is already huge and destruction as well. But what I think is worth emphasising is that imagine if we were to make Glasgow a ghost town in terms of the place where this is taking place, the COP negotiations taking place. If we were to do something huge elsewhere, coordinated across the world, targeting whatever, banks, occupying banks, doing whatever it might be, fossil fuel infrastructure, doing something like that in a coordinated way at the same time, obviously attention grabbing stuff that would be it would be a clear statement that the time is up for the circus, that the future is in the people's hands, without being too jingoistic, and we would be looking to platform the genuine way forward and make that story rather than the rounds of applause that will be echoing around Glasgow, I'm sure, when the handshakes are happening and more empty promises are made. I think I would say regarding the kind of the strategy for moving forward, how do we make things happen? The need to break down the silos of different types of social injustice and environmental injustices and campaigns is massive. A movement of movements needs to be built where we start to collaborate a lot more. Where, for example, people like Extinction Rebellion should be supporting the struggles that ordinary people are making to improve their lives and to overcome apathy, overcome a sense of futility, irrespective of whether that struggle is directly linked to some sort of environmental issue. I think that's critical. I think that sense of drawing together the threads of the rope that bind us all, and looking to cut them all to free ourselves. That is kind of central. So it's about as Makalevia, I'll refer to her once again, her statement, no shortcuts. It's about organising, it's about community organising, it's about connection building, it's about difficult conversations, about collaboration, and it's about going far beyond all the echo chambers that we exist in. It's a big challenge. I won't pretend it isn't. And finally, I'll just talking about Malm. Yeah, I'm aware of the arguments he makes around the direct action that prevents harm. I think that is a big part of the picture. I think it's a small part of the picture. I think we have to be careful not to get drawn along into something that is has relatively minor effect beyond symbolism, and perhaps takes our eyes off the ball regarding the great mass of people who need to be part of what's happening and not just passively public opinion. People need to be actively participating and not only passively considered as part of what politicians are worried about in terms of their votes and so on. And I think I'll leave it there and let someone else. Thank you. I hope you could hear me better this time.
Yeah, definitely could. Thanks, Hamish. Great. Al, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'll come in just to respond to, I think, Poppy. She was talking about co-opting language, and I totally agree about the way that the Tories are trying to co-opt Green New Deal and make it look like it's their idea, and it's we need to be really tough on saying that this is just a nonsense. It's just a facade that's really not going to change anything, and a lot of energy into that. Yeah, no. Respond first as well to Hamish about degrowth, because I think degrowth I think in concept, there's a lot of good to be said about degrowth, but I think what it misses is that it's mostly the rich that need to reduce their emissions. Most people in the world don't need to reduce their emissions as much. There's a few people that are emitting massive amounts of stuff, taking private jets, owning yachts, shit like that. It's them. It's those people that are responsible for the vast majority of emissions, and we need to make them reduce it. I'll respond a bit about airports as well, because when I was doing stuff for Manchester Friends of the Earth, it was the airport was one of them things that just kept coming up, and everyone was just like, "Oh, the council won't listen. They just won't even talk to us about the airport. They just close their ears as soon as they start talking about the airport." So, in some ways, I can kind of understand it. There's their councils are so underfunded at the moment that they're absolutely desperate for the cash. I think talking to the councils is basically useless. I think direct actions against airports in the past have been very successful, and I think they can be again. Focusing them on things like domestic flights that are completely pointless when we should have a we have a pretty good train system. Focus them on shaming those, and I suppose that kind of connects to sort of direct action tactics that Malm was talking about. And I've just started Kim Stanley Robinson's book, so I can't comment on that. And I didn't hear that much of Malm's talk. I caught about 10 minutes of it. But yeah, I definitely think that these are the tactics we need to consider, because we need to attach huge shame to these practices of burning stuff. We need to make sure that people are aware that when they're burning fossil fuels, people in the south are dying. The future is being destroyed through people driving SUVs. They need to be made unacceptable. And we can also make huge, if you go far enough, you can disrupt the energy system hugely by those kind of tactics. That kind of things like the tactics against fracking have really blocked that industry from taking off. I think that's been a fantastic campaign, and I think we can learn from the kind of anti-fracking campaign about how to stop it. The burning of fossil fuels. And I was wondering about COP26 as well, because we don't have very much experience of this kind of disruption in the north, of the kind of extreme end of the scale. So maybe at the COP26 we can hear from people in the global south who have maybe got more experience on the sort of front lines of these kind of fights and disruption. Yeah, so I think the COP is it's useless in terms of trying to pressure the politicians and decision makers, but I think it's a fantastic opportunity to place to run our own people's COP, to meet people from all around the world, and there are certainly really amazing people from the global south who come to the COPs to talk about genuine solutions. And if people from the global south will come all that way to tell us their experiences and share their knowledge, then I think we need to be there too. About local energy, I didn't hear the question, but I think it was about Sheffield and local energy in Sheffield. I mean, I think there's a lot of projects around the world that show that local people-owned energy companies can provide solutions for cities where people can own their own energy companies and can have control over what it does. So I think we need to learn from those successful organizations that have set up their own energy systems, and hopefully build those into our own cities here too.
Cool. Are you done now? Have you?
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah.
Brill, thank you. We've got a couple of hands up, so thanks, Alex. If we go over to Lee again, come back in.
Thanks. And just to clarify something, I think this is I've heard this a couple of times, misconception about degrowth. My reading of it, and I've done a bit of it on degrowth, is that globally, the global north needs to degrow, the global south needs to raise up so that everyone has a minimum floor of living. Yeah. And then within countries, there's a minimum floor and a maximum floor. So there is thinking around the equality, and it's not just degrowth of everything, it's growth of like health and education sectors, degrowth of fossil fuels, armaments, all the shit stuff. So I think the thinking on degrowth is on this kind of page, and they're I think as a movement they're quite aligned with the eco-socialist angle. I just wanted to come back to what Hamish said about the way getting a movement of movements. And I think it was interesting that he said you've got social movements and you've got environmental movements. This goes back to the binary thinking that's been going on for last 500 years and goes back to the double movement of the enslavement of women and the enslavement of people of the other colonially. And we need to get over this to get the outpouring of anger because of the murder of the woman in London. That is part of this struggle, and getting that communicated is the trick. And I just, yeah, it's difficult, but we need to have all the people who are being fucked over by the system in the same tent.
Yeah, absolutely. I really agree there, Lee. I suppose I'm just going to intervene from the chair, just to ask the speakers around, we're still in the throes of the kind of pandemic, and just to pull on some of the stuff that Lee said, there's been a lot of work by the Women's Budget Group around kind of a care-led recovery from the pandemic, and how a turn to a kind of purple jobs and green job creation could be a kind of turn away from production and towards kind of social reproduction. Do you think that maybe we're missing opportunities of coming together and kind of arguing for a redirection of our economies, and what would that kind of look like? And that's probably a bit broad, but I'll leave it to kind of you guys. I think it's really important that Zero COVID, that campaign has actually brought in quite a lot of arguments around like the economy, but also ecology, because with monocultures and the destruction of deforestation, we're only going to see more pandemics, and so how can we be organizing around other campaigns? So I know that's a bit broad and a bit rambly, but if I can throw that out to the speakers. Is there anybody else who would like to intervene from this floor before we kind of go back to the speakers? Oh, Ian's waving at me. Ian, yep.
Yeah, sorry, I have another question, which is about, I suppose it connects with this issue that you've raised, Ali, and that others have raised about the connection between different kinds of struggles. Because the question of climate is sometimes treated as if it's a single issue, but it's not a single issue. It's an issue that involves deeper problems. As Poppy said in her opening introduction, it's a question of capitalism, and the other speakers also were very clear about that as well. So my question is how we can extend our strategies of revolutionary socialist politics in order to include the question of climate and the question of ecology. I mean, in our tradition of revolutionary socialism, we often fell back on an approach which was known as transitional demands, or a transitional program, where we put certain kinds of demands that made sense to people in their experience and their activity at the moment, but took them in their activity beyond the limits of this system. So a very simple transitional demand, for example, would be a sliding scale of wages, which is a very reasonable demand, but something that capitalism just cannot agree to because of the nature of capital accumulation and exploitation. And I suppose one of the other transitional demands does come into play in relation to the ecological movement, which is open the books. In the transitional program back in 1938, the demand, open the books of the companies, make everything public and available to people so that we can decide ourselves, actually becomes even more urgent here in the case of these fracking companies and global corporations that are messing up the planet and are secretive about it, secretive about what is happening. So it seems to me that there's an opportunity here for taking forward some of the classic strategies that we were using in the past and using them to open up the ecological movement and turning it into a genuinely eco-socialist movement that will go beyond the limits of capitalism. Sorry, that wasn't really a question. That was a rant.
Thanks, Ian. We've also got Elizabeth who'd like to come back in. So if we go to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Chair. I don't know how I could follow that fantastic rant, but it is actually touching on some of the questions I've been thinking about in terms of how you build mass support for a Green New Deal and for, you know, sort of eco-socialist vision and so on. I remember, for instance, Ian Lavery, you know, was chair of the Labour Party, coming to the Labour Party constituency and saying, you can't tell people they can't fly and can't eat meat. Well, actually, a lot of people in the ecology movement are doing that now. And sometimes it comes across as very, very moralistic and sort of, you know, or some vision which some people might see cozy of some sort of Stone Age community or something. And, you know, the problem is when you talk about things like wealth redistribution, everybody's in favour of it so long as it goes a few points above the income level where they are, you know. So I do think there are some questions here about how we get the messaging right, what sort of vision we have of an alternative society. Because part of, you know, persuading people the case for socialism, I know you can't give a complete blueprint on everything, but it's talking about some alternatives. Now, are we talking about a more humane society where we spend more time talking to people and WhatsApping them less and things like this? You know, if we think about the mobile phone, you know, I've got one of them here. You know, some young people live their lives through them. I still feel puzzled. Sorry, I'm sounding elderly now. I still feel puzzled when I see people get their phone and start using it at a meeting to talk from. You know, times in some areas of life, there's pressure to use more and more technology all the time. I mean, when I was a university lecturer for a time, the whole learning, teaching, and assessment strategy was driven by technophiles who loved this stuff and thought the more you use technology, the better teacher you were. And Ian's laughing, but you know, there was all this pressure on people. And some of it's about being caught up in this notion of endless growth and endless consumption, but some of it's also about, you know, the belief that technology is always the fix-it and so on. And, you know, can we have a vision which still has an attractive lifestyle to people, you know? I'm not really keen on the idea of sailing the Atlantic in a tiny boat, as Greta Thunberg did. It doesn't seem very safe. You know, we've got to make it attractive as a life, or people aren't going to vote for it, unless parts of the ecology movement are planning to sort of impose it on something like the 21st century version of the bayonets of the Red Army, which I very less feel listening to some of them occasionally. So I really want to ask this question about, you know, how do we have an attractive version of such a society, which a majority of the population would actually support, so that, you know, mass support for ecological measures can go beyond things like being in favour of building more, planting more trees or more solar panels or things everybody can agree with. Okay.
Brilliant.
Sorry if that was a rant.
No, I think you're in the right place. Chris, were you waving? Yep, Chris, and then we'll come back to the speakers if that's okay, comrades.
Right, it worked. Yeah, no, I think what Liz just said is really important, because effectively consumerism can provide a political base, even for something as sort of as changed as green capitalism can go. And I think it's a really weak underbelly in our argument, and that is the capacity to find an idea of, you know, what the world will look like, what happiness will look like. You know, you don't need a massive TV, you don't need a flying holiday. You know what I mean? I mean, the Romans had it with bread and circuses and all that kind of stuff. And I think Blair, there used to be the joke about Allegro Man. You know, Blair promised everybody to have an Allegro in the drive or something like that, you know. But it does provide a very material base for what they're doing. And so people will believe and see things that are, you know, genuinely radical where they see them, but they will have that, you know, like I think Elizabeth said, it was sort of like, you know, it's all right as long as the cutoff level's slightly above my head. It's just to do with them. You can't convince people, you know, people go on strike for something that's tangible as an alternative, because I do like the idea of a general strike, which I think it was Hamish that was throwing in earlier on. But you need to have the demands that take people there. I mean, Ian talked about opening the books. I think opening the books on electronic cars would be really, really useful and important, because it would be a really good way of showing what the real costs, the environmental books, of something that is being pitched as the consumer replacement. You know, with the games, the consumerism as an ideological base. And something like that could be really, really useful, because people will understand the need to understand how much damage they're doing. And, you know, if that turns out to be creating so much damage to their world, their life, that they understand it can't be, you know, you project people forward a little bit into looking for an alternative. So.
Thanks, Chris. Who'd like to go first? Shall we bring Al? Can we go back to you, Alex? Is that all right? Mix it up.
Right. Yeah. I'll start by responding to Lee about degrowth, because I think I totally agree with what Lee was saying about degrowth, and you know, it does have kind of these ideas built into it. But to be honest, it's just the language of degrowth, like the kind of word degrowth without, you know, on its own kind of suggests that everyone has to kind of reduce, and I think it's kind of misleading when, you know, the actual work behind it doesn't show that. So I think the word eco-socialism is better than degrowth. Yeah, totally. Care jobs should really be the ideal future for an eco-socialist society, like caring for each other and caring for the earth. Can you imagine like a more green job? There's no emissions whatsoever, and you know, we can provide each other with the things that we need for each other without having to consume and buy stuff. And you know, I think care is something that we should be talking a lot more about. We've not even talked about the massive collapse in like biodiversity, which, you know, could trigger its own kind of environmental disaster if we don't kind of resolve that. And of course, care jobs fit into restoring our countryside, our other species, and all the ecosystems that have been degraded by intensive agriculture and infrastructure over the last 50 to 100 years. You know, it's been absolutely destroyed, and by caring for the planet, we can create green jobs that actually restore the ecosystems and capture carbon into the soils and prevent flooding and all that kind of stuff as well. On the transitional demands, I don't know. I think the reduction in working hours that Corbyn focused on and McDonnell focused on in the last election was a really good idea, and we should, you know, people are working so much and are absolutely exhausted that focusing on stuff, material gains for workers that actually kind of stop, give us more time to appreciate the areas around us, appreciate life, appreciate and learn hobbies and things like that, make connections to our local parks and local environment. Those kind of material benefits are something that I think could really have help people imagine a world beyond capitalism. I mean, we also need to kind of maybe have the ability to walk through our own countryside when we do have spare time, but at the moment we can't do because so much of our land is in private hands. But I think one of the other things that Corbyn really missed, and I think should be part of our transitional demands, would be massive restructuring of media ownership. And I think that's it.
Cool.
Elizabeth, I should send you my song that I wrote last week that is a rant about how rubbish technology is.
That's true. Maybe put a link in the chat, Al. That's great. Poppy, any thoughts?
There we go. So I think, I'll start with just on the subject of degrowth. I think like one thing that I think, again, it's like I was saying earlier, it depends who's using the word, what it means to different people. And I think a really important part of degrowth is on like a national or international level, is just like moving away from GDP as a indicator of wealth in a country, and just moving towards sort of well-being economies and measuring happiness, or like, you know, the well-being of the citizens of a country rather than, you know, financial measures. And I think that kind of links into what Ali was asking about the pandemic and how we do need a recovery that is moving towards sort of things like care. And I think that's one of the things we've been focusing on as Labour for a Green New Deal, is the idea of a green recovery. Because I mean, I think when the economy is in the situation it's in, you kind of need an alternative model, because the one that we have just isn't set up for crises, as we've seen in the pandemic. I feel like now would be a good opportunity to remind everyone, not remind everyone, but when we had the banner on one of those marches, care is carbon neutral. It's catchy. And yeah, I think we are definitely missing opportunities, and like that's why the Tories' handling of the pandemic has been so terrible, because they have been prioritising that like GDP type growth over well-being, and that with things like Eat Out to help out, they've been pushing everyone into situations which are, you know, making the pandemic worse, and it's longer for everybody, because they've been really feeling under pressure to fix the economy, but it's a kind of an economy that was already broken, so kind of getting it back to what it was before isn't going to help. So I think, yeah, we do need a green recovery, and that is, yeah, it's definitely an opportunity that's being missed currently by the Conservative government. And then in terms of kind of those transitional demands and things that connect to people, I think that's one of the things that we've found really with the Green New Deal, because we're not asking, because it's not about individual responsibility, and we're not asking people to give up their cars, we're not asking people to give up their holidays. That's kind of the focus is more on like those 100 companies that are causing 70% of global emissions, and like when we were doing canvassing about the Green New Deal and knocking on doors, it is something that connects with people, because when they realize it's more about a solution and it's not about them having to feel guilty for the world burning, and it can benefit them at the same time as that benefiting the climate, then that's kind of when it connects with people. And I guess that's how you build mass support, is and, you know, like Elizabeth was saying, not by being moralistic and not sort of telling people that they have to give things up, but like looking towards a world of sort of where we have public luxury. That's really what we're going for, is things like Alex was talking about, parks, and like how we have, and it just time as well, having more time on our hands to be able to do things. Then we don't need capitalism so much, because capitalism is designed for people working long hours, not having any time to make food with their families. Or I think even, it might be a little bit off topic, but I was watching Nadia's Time to Eat, you know, Nadia Hussain from Bake Off. And it's all like, she's lovely and charming, I have no issues with her and the program. And actually I've found some, like, the recipes are just things that you can do really quickly, and I found them really helpful, particularly like when you don't have energy. But she like goes to visit factories and things in kind of a Rosie and Jim kind of way and like meets the people who work there, and she has a go at like picking mushrooms. It's one of the biggest mushroom suppliers to all the supermarkets in the UK, and they're all like, all the workers are like running around the factory. They're working like 12 hours a day and like picking mushrooms really fast because they get paid by the punnet of mushrooms, not by the hour. And she's like, oh no, I would never make any money doing this, in kind of a jokey way, but that's actually like a really important point. Like, that's not how people should be working. And then she goes and sort of teaches people how to make these really quick and easy meals so that they can like claw back a bit of time with their families because they're working so much. And that's just not how we should do things. And so we do need to kind of, that's something that's going to resonate with people. It doesn't have to be consumer goods. It can be sort of time with your family when you're not spending 12 hours like running to pick as many mushrooms as you can. And I think like recently everyone's been having a bit of a bad time being unemployed in the pandemic, but I've recently been darning socks, and it's great because I haven't had to buy new socks, but you just don't have time for that when you're working normally. So they're the sort of things that you can definitely like connect with people on. And social housing as well doesn't have to be like it doesn't have to be, you know, ugly concrete blocks. It can be beautiful. And I think if we look at places like Vienna, or like when like nicknamed like Red Vienna, because they do have beautiful, you can have form and function. And so I think that kind of ties into as well what Chris was talking about with having a tangible alternative, and that consumerism does kind of provide a base for a way that it can connect to people's lives. But if we just kind of talk to people and think about other ways it can connect to their lives, then it will have kind of a meaningful impact, and people will be more like up for getting involved, I guess. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Poppy. That was ace. Talk about mushrooms. Hamish, over to you. I hate mushrooms, by the way. I've just had like all my comrades just like, you hate mushrooms. Anyway, sorry, over to you, Hamish.
I love mushrooms.
Yeah.
I agree with you on that. Everyone here, yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot of good points made again. So I would, in response to Ian, obviously, your rant was pretty self-contained, and I agree with it in principle. I think that the transitory demands you outlined are useful, are useful. How different groups approach this, you know, with an eco-socialist, should we say, platform. How that fits into a movement of movements, so to speak. Yeah, I think that it's balancing acts, and we need to be able to build those connections and find that common ground in a way that is difficult without ending up being, as it were, co-opted by the ruling status quo, as it were. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges there, but I'm sure we can do it. I really like the point that was made about care over production as the sort of the guiding feature of our societies and our so-called economies. I think that is a crucial part of the picture. I think that care can be a principle within countries and between countries, and not in a sort of paternalistic way, but in terms of reparation, the prevention of harm, redistribution of resources and power. This is, after all, a global conversation. You know, the point has been made about the consumption of those from the companies. But it isn't as simple as that. We all know that everything's integrated, that those companies, their production relies on the consumption of people, and it becomes a real situation, situation. So it's not as simple, really, just point at these things and say, yeah, something for the
Oh, Hamish, sorry, comrade, I'm going to stop you just because you're really breaking up. We were with you until, you were talking about care as a kind of almost solidarity and access to communities and that being international, but then you started breaking up. So I don't know if you could come back to us when you've sorted your kind of sound out. Richard, did you indicate that you would work like... That is better, comrade, yeah.
Yeah, I've turned my video off. Hopefully it's better. If you just wave your hand if I'm not working, it's not working. I'll try and be brief. Obviously, I've missed a little bit, but yeah, this is, as I said, this is what I finish on is saying is that there's two things I'd emphasise. It is about building victories for ordinary people systematically to gain a sense of confidence and a sense of belief that they can change things, that they can participate in things. That the world can be made to be theirs on a global level, and emphasising this vision that we can all chip into and we can all build together. That is combining the sense of an emergency, a crisis, and also a beautiful future and a sense of care and solidarity. And hopefully, that is a recipe for a movement of movements that can succeed.
Yeah, that was well put. I've got a couple more hands coming up, but thanks for that, Hamish. Richard, did you indicate, sorry, earlier, comrade? Yeah, or were you waving?
Sorry, I wasn't actually indicating. I must have been waving for some reason or other. But actually, now you've called me, perhaps I could say something. And that is just thinking about the point that people were making earlier about how the green issue relates to other campaigns. And I think that's really crucial, and people have talked about, of course, social care and so on. I'm speaking from Birmingham, by the way, and we have a real jobs crisis in Birmingham, as indeed I guess everywhere does, but actually it's worse in Birmingham than anywhere else in the country apart from Blackpool and Hull, and Birmingham's a very big city. Of course, we know that certain groups are particularly hit, people from particular ethnic minorities, women involved in hospitality and those sorts of sectors, and young people, which I hadn't really fully realised, but they are among those, including school leavers facing the future job market, who are going to be most hit. And this all relates to, obviously the main cause is COVID, but it also is compounded by Brexit. And that particularly hits certain sectors, for example, the West Midlands economy, like everywhere else. And the third strand in that is the shift, which we want, from high carbon jobs to green jobs. And that's a complex and difficult process. We've attempted to address this by a motion that we've put from Birmingham NEU, the Teachers Union, to the next Trades Council meeting, which says to that, look, we've got this three-sided crisis of a jobs emergency. And the problem is that unemployed people, and including those young people and school leavers looking to the future job market, face this really complex, changing, unpredictable and hostile job market just as individuals. There is no collective, systematized campaign of collective support and pressure. And we need one. The council has declared a jobs emergency, like many places, and has set up a task force on climate emergency, and set up a climate task force we're calling on the council to set up a jobs emergency task force, of which an important part would be green jobs. For example, retrofitting is one of the key things that we can do to make the economy less polluting. And that requires a whole new set of skills and support from training organizations and FE colleges, links with employers, links with young people and schools themselves. So I'll better stop now because I'm going on a bit, but because I'm really enthusiastic about this, that here is something concretely we can do to relate the climate issue with those jobs issues as well.
Yeah, it's really useful, Conrad. Thank you. Lee, and then I'm going to ask others just put, if you want a final contribution, and then we'll come back to the speakers and then we'll close the meeting. So if anyone would like to make a final contribution, just make yourself known. Over to you, Lee.
Thanks. I think it just on agreeing with everyone on the care issue is a kind of torpedo to undo capitalism. I think it's Patel and Moore say that in a world where we redistribute, share out, and reduce care for on mainly women, and start moving that, as Alex said, to the care for our environment, that's not capitalism anymore. The question I wanted to ask, though, is about within the Labour Party. I'm in the Labour Party still. Surprisingly, I voted no. I pushed a no confidence motion in Keir Starmer and the General Secretary because they're useless turds, and they've not kicked me out yet. But I would want to know what other people think they're doing in the Labour Party. I would encourage everyone to join the Labour Party, even if you hate it, just because Keir Starmer is not going to last, and we need as many people who understand the crisis and have their heads switched on to be able to vote in somebody who does. But yeah, the people who are in the Labour Party, what kind of tactics? Did you vote through the kind of recall conference, and what's going on in your local parties? Thanks. Just before I go, I'll tell you that Hilary Benn was on the call, and you should have seen his face when it went through the no confidence motion, like a pissed on his chips.
Great.
Nice. Al, because you did quite well with that motion. Do you want to over to you from Eastbourne?
Yeah, sure. Lee, you forgot to mention the bit where the chair told reminded Hilary Benn that he was the one that set up the chicken coup, so he can show up. That was the best bit. What's going on at my local party is just a bit of a mess, but it is sort of left wing, and I managed to kind of put the no confidence motion in Keir Starmer through, and the recall conference one last week. It's just, yeah, we did meetings just really a mess because the chair's got no time and it just keeps forgetting to do stuff, so it's chaotic, but it's kind of left still. I don't know, what can we do? Just keep putting to be honest, I don't think we should waste that much time on the Labour Party at the moment, but when there are opportunities to attack Starmer, try and disrupt the leadership, we should use that power when we've got it and try and force Keir Starmer out as soon as possible. But also, I think support other left members in the local parties and keep them in it, because one thing that I've been doing in my local party has just been having like monthly film nights, watching left-wing films, and it's kept some of the left-wing members in the local party that would have otherwise left because of the reason for them to stay in. And there's, we can be educating each other while the shit's going on at the top of the party, and keep inspiring each other. And that if we keep left-wing people in like that, we can hopefully get someone decent in when Keir Starmer finally gets kicked out.
I think we've got to wait, comrades, to be honest. But Poppy, over to you, and then Hamish, and then I think we're going to close the meeting. So any kind of final thoughts without trying to, just concentrating on the Labour Party, but over to you, Pops.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say about the Labour Party. I think I'm still a member reluctantly, but I think there's a lot of talk about stay and fight, don't give up. And I think it just as an activist who's involved in the 2019 general election, I think everyone's just really burnt out. And I think the number one priority is just like look after yourself. And if it's too hard and emotionally exhausting to be in the Labour Party, then that's fair enough, because I think at the end of the day, you've got to think about like long-term strategy, and part of that long-term strategy is like your own capacity and emotional ability to be able to fight. So I think you've kind of got to think about what's right for you at what time and what you're going to do with it as well. It could just be like paying your membership fees and biding your time and waiting until we can vote out Keir Starmer. Or it could be kind of being more involved in your local party. Like I was talking, it depends if you're in an area where you're quite lucky to have like a responsive council or like good local candidates, then it's kind of worth getting involved at that level. But yeah, and I guess there are some good things nationally, like Ed Miliband's been making some of the right noise. He kind of brought out a green recovery program and has got like people working in his office who like have been, done stuff on community wealth building. So there are some good things, but yeah, my thoughts are just sort of look after yourself. And I guess that's sort of, again, a good note to end on. I think it's really good to have different people coming at the problem, like I said at the beginning, from different angles. But yeah, I was just sort of, I see like youth climate strikers who are trying to do their A-levels at the same time as like fighting all this and taking it all on their shoulders. And it's just kind of, we just need to like look after each other and look after ourselves at the end of the day, I think. Yeah. End on a soppy note.
Yeah, thanks. Hamish, any last thoughts?
Yeah, you'll have to do without my lovely face and salt and pepper beard for a minute, because I think my connection is too bad to run the video at the same time. I'd like to echo what many people said and what Poppy just said about the care being central to what needs to happen, and the narrative, and that care extends to ourselves. Absolutely, we can drive ourselves mad in the circumstances. People have been driving themselves mad for centuries, certainly many decades already, over many different things. And yeah, it's not easy balance, and we have to try and achieve that. There's a million things to say. That's probably 7.5 billion things we could say, about what's the way forward and what can we do to best strategically act and come together. I think the only thing, if I had to just say one thing, I would say that the level of the crisis, the changes needed, point to me in the direction of a sustained global general strike in 2030. And I would like us all to imagine and to plan and to strategize accordingly. How can we make something like that happen? With the consciousness of that brings together all those injustices, all those exploitations and oppressions across the majority and minority worlds, and just with a sense that we're all sharing this one beautiful planet, and yeah, we need to do this. And I hope we can make it happen. 2030, put in your diaries.
Could I just say something, Alison?
You can, Lee. Yeah.
I went to it was a pandemic thing. It was about the vaccine kind of apartheid. Now, I would ask everyone, please email your MP, whether they're a Tory scumbag or not, asking them to waive the IP rights, because it is ludicrous. It's highly immoral. I'm sure you all agree, but it's also just stupid, because if we allow the global south to be like a petri dish for a new variant, it's just going to come back and bite us. So it is stupid, and it needs to happen. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely agree. Okay, so I'd just like to thank our speakers, and I think it's been a really, really great meeting. It's been quite a small meeting, but I've actually think that that's given us more opportunity to kind of, you know, chew on some of those ideas and also kind of explore, you know, our strategy. And I think, you know, coming back to what we talk about with care, and that's actually the theme of our next meeting, which is quite useful about, you know, what does care look like and under socialism, but also what are our transitional demands to get there and what does that look like. So we haven't got a date for that yet, but I'd just like to point you in the direction of the next national ACR, because we are ACR North meeting, which is on Hong Kong and China, workers' struggle and democracy, which is on Thursday. And also there is a critical university event on Saturday, which is around which is a feminist event, and it's the world we live in now, so kind of analysing our current situation, but also the struggle moving forward in the world, for the world we want to see. And there is actually the second half of that event is around care, and there's some further reading lists, and there's a reading list on there which is pretty cool anyway. So even if you can't make the event, there's some really cool articles which should be read. Great. So thank you again for tonight, comrades, and you know, keep an eye out for ACR North stuff, meetings coming up, and you're always welcome to join us. So shall we close the meeting, Ian? Are you okay to do that?
I'm going to stop the
Very
recording
good.
now.